I'd like to get started today with discussing a talk on overcrowding the emergency department. Um, I'm going to start off with a definition, causes, departmental assessment, as well as ER and hospital-based solutions. Simply defining overcrowding as the inability to take care of the next urgent patient requiring medical attention. The U.S. Department of Health came out with a statement which reads that maintaining inpatients in the emergency room is not acceptable. This is, however, easier said than done. If you look at data from the left to the right, U.S. hospitals, emergency department visits are exponentially rising. These numbers are in the millions. However, the number of emergency departments, is the gray dotted line, is decreasing. The data on the right, the NHS in England, also has the numbers going up to 21 million from 16 million, as well as Australian data showing the ED presentations up from 3.5 roughly to 4.9 million. So it doesn't look like there's light at the end of the tunnel. If we look at the data from projected population growth in Australia, the number of 65 to 74 as well as greater than 75 years of age are both predicted to rise. So if I would ask the question, what is the number one cause of boarding, what's the number one cause of overcrowding in the emergency department? Is it seasonal variations, example flu season, or is it the increase in non-emergent patients visits, or is it the boarding of admitted patients, or is it the flow and processes in the emergency department? And the answer is C, the boarding of admission patients in the emergency room. In case you're not familiar with the way boarding is, or what boarding is, there are beds you can see in the hallway. There are beds that are in front of the nurse's station. And looking at the data from the patients that are boarding, in other words, waiting for a bed upstairs in the inpatient unit, predominantly the majority of these patients, about 68% of the time, are spent after a decision to admit has been made. Needless to say, this will decrease patient satisfaction. It will also increase the emergency department wait times, and it will reduce the number of viable beds, which makes sense. Consequences of boarding, which also include mortality, and the data from this actually is in this slide here. This is a retrospective study published in the Medical Journal of Australia on a retrospective analysis on 66,000 patients, and the 10-day mortality, if you look on the left, 101 in the non-crowded department, and overcrowded departments about 144, defining overcrowded as a length of stay greater than 2 hours. This is another health facility in the Midwestern United States with 78,000 visits per year, and you could see that they experience severe throughput delays and inpatient bottlenecks. And this brings up my next slide, which is the ED Benchmark Society. This is a society based in the United States, and it looks at and divides departments based on their size. If you look at very large departments, which categorized as over 60,000 visits, medium between 20 and 40, and small community under 20,000 visits annually. And you could look and kind of compare your department to this benchmark society data regarding admission rate, percentage, length of stay, and other parameters that are measured. And once you find you plot your data, you could look at this as an example of a small department and kind of plotting data, volume data. This is length of stay in also a smaller department, and looking at the red on the top would be kind of once you're in the red, you don't want to be in the red. In other words, that's an indication for you that something's going wrong with your department. Again, the against medical advice or left without treatment, once your percentages, you can plot them and look at data from ED Benchmark Society at your individual department. And that's where the next slide, which is the operational assessment. And you need to know what's going on in your department to fix the overcrowding problem. And if you look at the goals from the assessment, it will be to identify opportunities for improvement. Also, you want to identify and solidify your strengths. If you were to divide the department into 3 parts, the input would be from the time the patient arrives to the emergency room till he's seen by the physician. The throughput is everything in between the initial visit from the physician until the decision or a disposition is made, and output is actually from the time of disposition to physically leaving the department. Things and initiatives that can assist in the speeding up the input component is in this slide here, mentioning registration process and immediate bedding. And registration can be done at the bedside rather than having the patient wait in a waiting room. Bringing him back to the bed has increased flow, has increased patient satisfaction. Considering an immediate triage system, which includes a physician complement, also has sped up length of stay. Looking at throughput, this also involves the lab, radiology. It includes manpower, and if there's an ED expansion or hospital expansion that takes place. Radiology, having the department close by to the emergency room minimizes delays. Having faster turnaround times, implementing point of care testing in the lab. There's a lot of emergency departments that will have chemistry as well as ABGs done, troponins, urine dipsticks, and these speed up the length of stay and minimize overcrowding. The expansion of an emergency department is also a long-term goal. Recently we have undertaken an expansion that's doubled our size, and that helps to improve the bottleneck. The main thing to avoid is departmental silos or compartmentalization of your department, meaning having beds just specifically for surgery, just specifically for OB-GYN, just specifically for peds. This tends to restrict your department's capacity. Your beds should be able to take care of any patient at any time. The output process, as mentioned, is from the time of disposition, discharge, and the handoff of admitted patients. So once you're done with your assessment, you've identified your strengths, you've looked at what you need, and now you're going to confront the problem. Now, the main thing to remember is that to solve overcrowding in emergency room, you need to look at also not only the emergency department, but you need to look at beyond that into the hospital and look at hospital-wide based solutions. And this slide is labeled as clockwork in the emergency department. It looks at addressing this, maximizing resource allocation, which is the emergency department expansion, the processes, reforming the processes, and that addresses the delays in the department, and the expediting inpatient admissions. And we'll talk a little bit more about this because this is actually brings me to my next slide. This is actually a form of what we call the bed czar, which is one person that's in charge of the emergency department, inpatient wards, PACU, the post-anesthesia care unit, and allots beds as needed for the hospital. However, the downfall of this is that it's too complex for one person, especially if it's a larger hospital. The initiatives that have a little bit more success to them we'll be discussing here: the patient placement command group or center, the no delay nursing report, dedicated admissions nurse, and also the emergency room physician admit authority. This is data from inpatient nurses, emergency room nurses that were polled at a hospital in the United States about what their common response they hear over the phone is when they call to give a nursing report. Usually 55% of the time they say that the nurse is usually busy. This patient placement team is actually designed to have oversight as well as individualize the roles for the team members and completely overtake the patient placement to the hospital bed. So if you could see, the next slide talks about streamlining the process with a dedicated admissions nurse. The top part of the graph actually is usually what happens in most hospitals. The ED patient is admitted, the nurse receives the bed, and nurse assignment from bed control. The nurse calls the floor to ask if the bed's ready. Then there's a delay. The nurse then calls the floor to ask if the bed is ready again. There's another delay. The ED nurse then will report. The nurse will arrange for transport, and the patient will leave the ED. This usually takes about 82 minutes. Now the bottom graph is a streamlined process with a direct admission nurse. The ED nurse contacts the admission nurse directly. The admission nurse assigns the patient to an empty bed, and the patient leaves the department, and the admission nurse herself will initiate the initial treatment. So the next slide actually had another idea called the direct report, and this is where the nurse faxes a report with as you can see an example of a nursing report from a hospital on the right with all the information. The fax is received at 12:02 and the patient leaves the department at 12:05. Managing bed demand. This is a recipe for disaster. A patient that's supposed to leave at 9 or 10 ends up leaving at 6 because of all the mistakes that you see, from the physician not writing the order, from the patient unaware of the discharge, from the patient transport home not being arranged. Preparing for discharge usually involves preparation from day one with a discharge checklist. This is to streamline bed turnover. This is a system where the housekeeper is able to clean the bed. It's all electronic. It tells her that the bed is dirty. The bed is then in process when it's green. And then when it's green, the bed is clean, and as you can see from the graph. This is a hospital in Loma Linda in the United States in California, which decided to give the physician the decision to admit and to prevent any grief with the inpatient physician.